أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. One of my viewers requested that I make a reading list video about Avicenna, Ibn Sina. So that's what I'm doing. Ibn Sina is one of the most important, if not the most important, philosopher in the history of Islam. In the Islamic intellectual history, you can talk about before Ibn Sina and philosophy after Ibn Sina. Philosophy before and philosophy after. His advent, his contributions are a watershed event, and they were definitive in terms of fixing a certain terminology in Arabic for philosophical discourse, and even a certain style of presentation and order of subjects. So Ibn Sina is absolutely crucial, and I don't know why I haven't made a video about him before. The fact is, though, that some of what I'm about to say in terms of books and references, I have mentioned, but it was a long time back. It was before the entire Corona drama. And I actually had a class devoted to Ibn Sina that I was running from my house on a private basis. I had 2 students, and they were coming regularly. And of course, this all fell apart when the evil Dr. Fauci unleashed his whole game on the world in concert with his devilish minions. And it fell apart. But I think it's 10 different classes devoted to the Kitab al-Shīʿah, or the healing, also known as the cure of Ibn Sina, that you can go and watch. And I probably mention most or all of these books in that series of videos. I don't remember at this point. So Ibn Sina, as I already said, is extremely important. He is known as a Shaykh al-Ra'is. He was born in the year, 350, I think. Let me see. I have a bunch of books here. Because the millenary of his birth was, I'm always kind of bad on dates, so let's get this right. Let's see. Great, right when you need to, yeah, the year 1370. Yeah, so he was born in the year 370. 370 of the Hijrah, so that would be 950 of the Gregorian calendar in Bukhara. And he died in 437 of the Hijrah, or 1037 of the Christian calendar. So that's a long time ago. It's more than 1,000 years ago, but he's that influential and he's that important. So if you want to get started with Ibn Sina, you actually have to rewind another 1,000 years or so before that. Or another 1,000 years? No, it's less than that. Many centuries before the birth of Ibn Sina, before you can actually understand what he is doing. Because you must understand Aristotle. You cannot understand Islamic philosophy unless you have some background, and more than some, really, a good grounding in Aristotle. The problem is Aristotle is one of the most unreadable philosophers in the history of philosophy. But there's a lot of people who qualify for that. Kant is another one. Hegel is another one. A lot of these philosophers are just unreadable. So Aristotle is very difficult, even if you know Greek. I do not. But what I advise my students to do is to begin their study of Islamic philosophy with Aristotle by getting this book. This is called Aristotle for Everybody. It's by Mortimer J. Adler. Yeah, Aristotle for Everybody. Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. This is a hardcover. There are a lot of copies of this book floating around. I bought this hardcover, I kid you not, some years back for about $5 US. That's not a lot of money. It's within the budget of most people. And this is an extremely readable book. If you study this book, take notes, absorb, and digest. This is the key in philosophy. Philosophy is not intellectual snacking. It is chewing, digesting, and this is very healthy food. Philosophy is not like a intellectual junk food. So you need to spend time to digest and absorb and assimilate these ideas, and Aristotle for everybody is absolutely the best place to start. However, before you plunge then into the study of Islamic philosophy of Ibn Sīna, you need a little bit more work with Aristotle, and then for that, a kind of intermediate level, I recommend this book. It's just called Aristotle, A Guide for the Perplexed by John A. Vella. This is a little bit higher up than Adler, but if you study these two books, and they are both relatively inexpensive, you will have a good basis in Aristotle on which to build. Now, unfortunately, the study of Ibn Sīna is an expensive proposition in terms of buying books. So none of these books are cheap. You can look around on the used book market. Maybe you will be successful. But the basic place to start with Ibn Sīna is one of these books as an introduction. I'm going to give the more recent one first because I have a legitimate copy of that. And that is simply entitled Avicenna by John McGinnis. John McGinnis is one of the leading researchers and authorities on Avicenna. He, according to the back of this book, he teaches at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. He's associate professor there in classical and medieval philosophy. This is an Oxford University Press book. Again, Avicenna, it's in the series called The Great Medieval Thinkers. Let's get the publication date. This is relatively recent. So this is 2010. There is an older book by L.E. Goodman, but I don't have an actual copy of that. I have a photocopy, which I made when I was in Malaysia, and then I had it bound. But it's published by, it's also, again, you can confuse it, it's also just called Avicenna. But it's by L.E. Goodman, and this is a Routledge publication. This came out also in a series called Arabic Thought and Culture, and this is 1992. They're both really good. But since this is a pretty expensive proposition, just buy whichever one you can get, which is cheaper, and you'll be fine. But that is the place to start. A lot of the works of Avicenna have been translated into English. So Avicenna is not just a philosopher, he is also a physician. In this video, I'm not talking in any way about his medical contributions. That is a separate subject. I am not a practitioner of medicine, whether modern or traditional, but he is extremely important. Suffice it to say, he wrote a book called Al-Qanun fi at-Tibb, or The Canon of Medicine, which was a medical textbook for some 6 or 7 centuries. There are translations of bits of it. There was an English translation of I think book 1 by an actual MD named Gruner, Gruner or Grunner. I do not have the book. PDFs are available. It's still published. There's some editions of it floating around. There are some modern editions. If you search on Amazon, they are lousy, even though they're done by medical doctors. These guys don't know about Islamic philosophy. They don't understand the terminology. They've done a terrible job. So if you're interested in the medical side, you really need to learn Arabic. In general, if you really want to learn Ibn Sīna, you're going to have to learn Arabic at some point. But this is a video on getting started with Ibn Sīna. So, his very important book on metaphysics is this part of the Kitab al-Ilahiyat, or al-Ilahiyat min al-Shīʿah. This is in Arabic. There is an English translation by Michael Marmura. It's called The Metaphysics of the Healing, a parallel English-Arabic text. So this has both the Arabic and the English. This is hardcover. This is Brigham Young University Press. This is an expensive book. I told you this was not a cheap intellectual enterprise to embark upon. I think I paid nearly $100 for this, but that's because I bought it in Kuala Lumpur. I was living there at the time in Malaysia. But even now, I think this is a pretty expensive book. I haven't checked on Amazon. I leave that to you. And, if you have to take out a loan to get the book, it would surprise me. There's a translation also of the physics section, the physics of the healing by none other than John McGinnis. It's in 2 volumes, again, through the Islamic translation series of the Brigham Young University Press. So this is volume 1 and 2. Again, these are expensive books, but you'll find the essence of the teaching of Avicenna there. Concerning the psychology of Avicenna, he has a kind of very concentrated summary of the Kitab al-Shifa called the Kitab al-Najat, the Book of the Deliverance, and the psychology portion, in other words, the doctrine of the soul, was translated by Fazlur Rahman. I don't know if that's still in print, but I have a PDF. If you search online under the psychology of Avicenna, you can find a PDF. If you're interested in his psychological doctrines, in other words, on the doctrine of the soul as understood by Avicenna, you need to, again, have some background in Aristotle, like Aristotle's book, The De Anima. And indeed, if you go and read the Metaphysics of Avicenna from the Healing, you really should read the Metaphysics of Aristotle as well. You should read his physics. So this is a difficult enterprise. If you want to do this, it's going to take a lot of time and investment of money as well. One perhaps more accessible, sort of 1 volume, and again, I don't know if this is also probably an expensive book. This is called The Metaphysica of Avicenna. This was translated by Parvez Muravej, or Parviz Muravej. This is a really old book. This was first published in 1973 by Routledge and Kegan Paul in London. This is the English translation of the metaphysical portion of a work which Avicenna wrote in Persian called the Donishnamoye Ala'i. And it has a lot of useful notes and so forth. This is another excellent work if you want to consult. If you live in a city where there's a massive research library, like if you were fortunate enough to live in Princeton University, live near Princeton University or Harvard or one of those places, sometimes you can get access. I know that Princeton you can get access to if you live in the vicinity and you go and you show them a utility bill or something. They let you into the library and you can read books there. That's one way of saving money, but I don't know. That's an option which is only open to a very few people. So there is another sort of book which is a guidebook of sorts to Ibn Sīna, and it's by Dimitri Gutis. Dimitri Gutis is an extremely erudite scholar who teaches at Yale, and this again is an expensive book. I think this is $60 paperback because it's a Brill book. It's published by E.J. Brill in Leiden. It's called Avicenna and the Aristotelian Tradition. This is the second revised and enlarged edition, and it includes an inventory of Avicenna's authentic works. This is pretty fundamental, but this is, again, a very heavy-duty scholarly book. So that's Dimitri Gutis, E.J. Brill, another expensive work. If you really, really get interested in Avicenna's Kitab al-Shifa, there's no way around it. You have to read this book by one of the students of Dimitri Gutis. That's Amos Bertolacci. It's entitled The Reception of Aristotle's Metaphysics in Avicenna's Kitab al-Shifa, a milestone of Western metaphysical thought. This is E.J. Brill also. This is also an expensive book. It's probably a couple $100. When did this come out? This came out in 2006. This is an absolute masterpiece. It is a must-read. Going down the list. I was talking about Avicenna's Doctrine of the Soul. This is a work by someone named Tommaso Alpina, Subject, Definition, and Activity. This is published by De Gruyter in Germany, Berlin and Boston. Another expensive book. This is probably $60 or $70. But it has an excellent translation of Avicenna's Kitab al-Nafs from the Kitab al-Shifa. So this is it. It's in the series Scientia Greco-Arabica. books in this series are very expensive. Similarly, Aristotle's logic was extensively expanded and developed by Avicenna. And so here we have this book by Silvia Di Vincenzo, Avicenna, The Healing Logic Isagogue, a new edition, English translation and commentary of the Kitab al-Madkhal of Avicenna's Kitab al-Shīʿah. Again, De Gruyter, Berlin, Boston. What year is this? 2021. An expensive work. So, yeah. I've spent a lot of money on books. Indeed. No dispute there. All right, in terms of a couple of important studies on Ibn Sina. So among the big names are McGinnis. I mentioned him, didn't I? Dimitri Gutis. John McGinnis. Amos Bertolacci. But one of the most perceptive readers of Avicenna is Robert Wisnowski, who went to Princeton. He was there around the same time I was, but he was several years ahead of me. He now teaches at McGill, and he wrote this beautiful book on Avicenna's Metaphysics and Context, published by Duckworth. Duckworth, what year? Duckworth, 2003. This is it, Avicenna's Metaphysics and Context. And this is actually autographed by Robert. You can see the inscription there if you want. Whoops. Now, Robert Wisnowski never published his Ph.D. dissertation, but it's available through dissertation, ProQuest dissertations. If you have access to a university library, sometimes you can download for free. Otherwise, it'll cost you about $40. If you want to buy a copy. And this is his Princeton dissertation called Avicenna on Final Causality. It is really an excellent work. It's a 1994 dissertation, and this is my copy. Because when you defend your dissertation, you have to put one on file with the department, and anybody can pop in and borrow it from the secretary and read it. I don't know if they still do that, given the whole digital hegemony of the world now. But this is from that time. After he defended, it was just lying around. I asked the secretary if I could have it, and they said, yeah, go ahead. So this is it. I put my stamps on it, my library stamps. But this is an absolute masterpiece, because Ibn Sina talked about final causality. It's a kind of mode of causal explanation which you find in Aristotle, which Aristotle doesn't really develop at length. And Wisnowski has a very ingenious reading and, shall we say, take or interpretation on that. So these are the books which I recommend. They're absolutely fundamental for Avicenna. Now, before I conclude the video, he did also write a kind of summation of his ideas in a very, very concise form. And that is a book known as Remarks and Admonitions, or Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat. And unfortunately, there's no good edition. I'll show you what I have here. So here's one volume. Here's another one. There's sort of two editions. There's one that was done in Egypt. I had this beautifully bound there. This is the edition by Suleiman Dunya. With all due respect to Suleiman Dunya, rahimahullah, this is not a good job. This is not really a good edition, but it's one of the ones that's out there. And if you're in Egypt, this is really cheap, and you can go and get it very nicely bound like I did. And then there's an edition which sort of floats around more so in Iran. Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat. There is really a need to do a new edition, basically, of all of his works, but that's something which, who knows who's going to do that. But we are fortunate that we do have a translation of, it should be all of Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, all 4 volumes of it, and they're all by someone named Shams, S-H-A-M-S, Inati, I-N-A-T-I. I don't know if she is Lebanese or Iraqi, but she has done these translations. So the logic portion was translated and was published by the Pontifical Institute at the University of Toronto. And then she went on to translate the metaphysics and the physics, and also the part on, mysticism. And they were published separately, but now I think the metaphysics and the physics part you can buy. You can go on Amazon and look under her name, and then the part on mysticism, which was published as Avicenna on Mysticism, it was published by Routledge years ago. I don't know if that part is still in print, but again, you can look around. Maybe you can find PDFs. I have either actual copies or photocopies of all of these. So that is another place to go to read Avicenna in the original. I think the translations are a bit literal. They don't really read very, very nicely, but that is what is available. So the person who asked to have this video made, I hope you find this to be useful, and I hope other people also find it useful as well. Like I said, I probably should have done this a long time ago, and so I'm glad that when my viewers, my audience out there says make a video on this or that, and I'm happy to oblige. So this is a rather difficult topic, but again, there are people out there who are interested. So those of you who are interested, I hope you find these suggestions useful. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Whether any of you go out and actually read these books, and you can also watch my series on Avicenna's Kitab al-Shifā, the Ilahiyat. So let me know how you found how it goes with your studies in this regard, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.